Hi everyone, welcome to Active Self-Protection Extra, here today with Terry Johnson, the Vice President of Legal Operations at Firearms Legal Protection. You are in charge. Is that your title today?
We'll take it.
We'll take that title. And today I want to talk to you about case law and why case law is important, but I think most people really misunderstand it. Firearms Legal Protection just started a 100% free monthly newsletter to bring quality, accurate information about legal self-defense to good, sane, sober, moral, prudent people like you. Go sign up for free, no-hassle help for your self-defense at the link in the description, and thank them for sponsoring today's lesson. So Terry, I hear this all the time on the intertubes, right? Everybody wants to talk about, well, you know, case law says.
Yes.
And I think that for the most part, most people's understanding of case law is pretty misguided.
Yes, it really is, because there is sometimes, case law is, how can I explain this? You've got a law that's been put in place by the legislative branch.
So now that's what we would call black letter law, right?
Yes.
So this, the legislature says this is the law.
Correct. How it's applied changes because they being the legislative branch, don't always give you every situation, every scenario, and everything else. So, recently had a case in Michigan where the prosecution charged someone with deadly use of a weapon, that weapon being a baton, right?
Okay.
And they said that this person was concealing this weapon. And the attorney that argued this said, well, wait a minute, according to case law, right, this is not a dangerous weapon, because the legislative branch said dangerous weapon. And basically, they listed a few items in there. Now, not everything.
Right, it wasn't an exhaustive list.
Right. But what the court came back and said is, well, if you look at what we're considering as a deadly weapon here, or what the law says, these are stabbing instruments. And this is not a stabbing instrument. So therefore, it doesn't fall under the jurisdiction thereof.
Huh.
So the court will take a look at it and try and interpret to its best. When I say the court, I'm talking the appellate court and the Supreme Court. We'll take a look at jury instructions and the law itself, and basically try to put it into a place that the common ordinary people like you and I can sit down and say, okay, well, this was not a stabbing instrument, therefore it doesn't fall into this, so therefore I've got to find this guy not guilty. Or the prosecution's got to say, well, it's not a stabbing instrument, so I got to throw this out.
So black letter law is what the legislature passes.
Yes.
Case law starts to get this idea of how does the judicial system interpret the words that were written.
Correct.
Now, these words were ostensibly written by people who know what they were doing, but they're generally not lawyers and professionals at legal words. Then those words get interpreted by lawyers using their law books.
Correct.
Now, so it might be written what that looks like English here, but these guys translate it into lawyer and figure out how that works. Hopefully then make jury instructions back in English.
Yes, and we got to figure out how it applies and what applies. So, you know, if you take a case, you know, if I pull a gun on you, have I used deadly force?
Big deal in the state of Michigan.
It is, and you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
Yes.
I do know this argument very well.
So is that a use of force or not? And, you know,
depends on the state you're in. In some states,
it depends. See, I told you he needs to go to law school. We're working on it.
So in some states, pointing a firearm at somebody is a use of deadly force.
Right.
In Michigan, it's by how the law has been interpreted in the courts of Michigan is that is a use of physical force.
Exactly.
And so that depends on which state you're in. So here's the interesting thing. This is why I want to talk about case law, because I have seen somebody go, well, you know, this case in Michigan. And in Michigan, this law says that the pointing of a firearm is the use of ordinary force.
Yes.
But that doesn't matter in Arizona.
So that's called, if Arizona doesn't have something on its books, it's called persuasive law, which basically means that judge, even though we don't have something like that here, we got a state like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Illinois, that basically has
we would like you to consider.
Yes, that said this, and this is where we think you need to land, because, you know, judges love to be the first one in line to come up with, you know,
Gets
new
them
law.
to move up the ladder when they do that stuff.
So they're like, oh, no, I got this. That's persuasive law. Binding law
Yeah.
basically means that the state of Arizona has said this, this, and this, and you have to follow it. I don't care what Michigan and the other states said. We in Arizona have said A, B, and C, and that's what we have to follow.
And there is a difference between your state laws and federal law.
Correct.
So what is case law in federal court, unless it has been adjudicated as binding on the states and incorporated to the states, isn't required always to be followed in state law, because the state can have a unique law.
So here's the question. There is, from a federal perspective, homicide or murder cases are not under federal statute.
Those are state statutes.
State statutes. So you're not, for the most part, going to get a federal review of those because they are state cases.
Right.
However, you are correct. In most cases, there's very few times that a federal statute will come in. Now, on some rules of evidence, yes, there are some things where, the federal government has said this is a violation of someone's 4th or 5th or 6th Amendment right, etc. Therefore, it has to be brought in.
So that's where the federal case law comes in, when it says, no, the states must also respect the rights of their citizens. We've all agreed to that constitutionally.
Correct. Now, here's the other part about this. Now, I want to go back. Remember how I said what happens in Michigan and versus Arizona?
Yeah.
So you guys are the 9th Circuit, right?
Yes.
We're the 6th Circuit. So if the 6th Circuit has come up with a law, okay, through its appeal process or a finding, it's only persuasive on the 9th Circuit and in the states that are there.
It's persuasive, but it's not binding.
It's not binding.
Which is why when we see circuits that disagree, those are the ones that trickle up to the Supreme Court.
Because the Supreme Court has said we need to have one rule across. We can't have something in California that's so far left and something in Maine that's so far right. We got to come together and we got to say which one is going to work.
And I think that the standard that we see of this, the one that self-defense folks would understand, would start with DC versus Heller, right?
Yes.
So because there was this discussion, do we have an individual right to keep and bear arms? And there was discussion among the circuits that they disagreed. And so finally the Supreme Court comes down and says, yes, definitively yes. Now then, but wait a minute, what does that have to do with state law? So now we're talking about in federal court and DC versus Heller, you have a right to keep and bear arms. Well, then Otis McDonald said, but wait a minute, that's then a right that I have as a citizen, so the city of Chicago cannot prohibit that right.
Correct.
So then there was a whole court case that made it all the way back up there that says, hold on a second, does this apply to the states, or is this just federally? Is this only in federal court or state court? Supreme Court said state courts too.
Correct.
Because he has a right.
Exactly.
And so that's when you see those things start to bleed over. But I want you to see that just because the 6th Circuit says something doesn't mean the 9th Circuit says that.
Correct. And they're called circuit splits.
Yep.
And
those
again,
are the ones that head up to the higher courts.
right. And until the higher court comes in and says this is what it is, it is what it is in that particular state.
So you as a citizen, if I understand this correctly, Terry,
Yes.
you are covered by the court that has jurisdiction over you.
Correct.
So in Arizona, binding law that's applied for all of Arizona affects me as an Arizona citizen. Doesn't necessarily affect you as a citizen of Michigan.
If I'm trying a case in the state of Michigan, correct.
If you're trying a case in the state of Michigan. However, if you're here in Arizona, you're going to be held to the standards of Arizona while you're here.
One of the first things I learned in law school, I had a professor who said, we're talking about something. I said, that's a stupid law. And he looked at me and said, you don't like the law of that state? Don't go there.
Don't go there or work to change it, right?
Yeah.
Work with their legislature. The legislature makes laws, judiciary interprets laws. So now I have a case that I say, aha, this case happened in federal court. Well, wait a minute, was that federal court in my circuit?
Correct.
Or was it, now Supreme Court decisions
are binding everywhere.
For everywhere
Right.
in federal court, unless they've been specifically incorporated to states.
Correct.
Which they generally have, blah, blah, blah. So biggest thing, people say, well, case law in this arena says. The other part that I hear about this is that people think that a case law has to be exactly about the same thing in order to be applicable in a particular case.
No, how do you take the facts and apply the facts to the law? That's truly what law is about. How do you take the facts and apply it to the law? What's different? What's the same? And good attorneys in the criminal defense area, prosecutors as well, they'll look at this and say, okay, well, they're going to argue this. How do I counter this? What about this? Well, is there a case law that says this? And again, that's when it goes back to the judge, as we've talked about on previous...
Your Honor, you have to apply the rules this way.
Yep, and they say, nope, it's this way. The judge makes a decision, and it moves up the chain if someone's not happy with it.
So please, be very careful in talking about case law. Be very careful in applying case law, because there's a good chance, if you're not a trained professional in this, you don't know how the case law applies. We've just talked about DC versus Heller and McDonald versus Chicago. Those are big cases, very well known.
Yes.
Those kinds of things. But frankly, even I'm a Supreme Court junkie, right? I'm watching the court, see what they're taking, what they're not, what their arguments are, who they were, what they did. Heard me talk about, like, I read Ruth Bader Ginsburg's memoirs, because I'm just interested in the court. Even folks like me, as a enthusiastic amateur, don't understand all that in all their ways. So before you start bandying about case law, talk to an actual attorney, would you? Terry, appreciate you.
Thank you.